Hello, this is Dahlia Deborah Donalds, your host for Sacred Mindshift Circle. And for this session, I wanted to dedicate it to my actual experience with gang stalking. And a lot of people, as soon as you mention that, all of a sudden start to look at you a little bit funny. They think that you're a whack job. But there have been so many reported cases, and day by day, these cases have been increasing of the amount of people who are claiming to be targeted individuals. So not only this, as I have also posted on other social media platforms, it can't be that so many individuals are also having the same things happen to them, a lot of the same tactics and phenomena. And sometimes you can be completely across the world from the people who are explaining these things, and yet you will see that many of the things that they're saying are happening in your experience. So people can believe what they want at this point, because I've also just passed that point of caring about what people think. So many things that have happened. And the thing about gang stalking is, by the time you realize that it's happening to you, it's probably been going on way longer than you actually were aware of or realized, because the fact that you are beginning to notice the gang stalking, or that the gang stalking is getting more intense or more noticeable, is because you are awakening. So that means that while you were still kind of dormant or sleeping, things were happening in your life. You weren't attributing it to gang stalking. You were attributing it to other factors. But in some cases, depending on who you are, just your mere birth, being placed into a specific family, was for the purpose of controlling you. Obviously, I do feel that we select who or which families we go into, right? And we choose our vessel in this reality. But a lot of factors that happen to us, these kind of things that are meant to be obstacles or traumas to us, I feel like those are the things that the Matrix does so that we won't fulfill our calling, or we won't be in the right vibration when the awakening, the mass awakening, begins to happen, which is already happening because we've entered into the 5D earth. So I'm going to start first on the things that were happening to me here in the Mediterranean. And, recently we just had the blackout that happened on April 28th in Spain, Portugal, and parts of France. And, I had been telling my family from way before. I've been saying, there's something going on out here. It's like very weird. And I was saying this at least from about January, okay? Because it's from about January that I really, I think, opened my eyes as to what was going on, and to really understanding that not everyone around us are people with souls, or that have entities in them that are from God, right? And it's ironic because for many years I'd listened to talk show hosts and podcasts of people always talking about all of the different topics related to this being a matrix, to I listened to all the conspiracy radio stations that you could imagine, okay? I was a very big listener of like Tommy at Truth Mafia for many years, for example. So I knew the whole thing about gematria and how it affects a lot of things, or things seem to be very scripted in this reality, right? So, of course, I was always hearing it, but it was never as, how should I say? It didn't sink in. it really didn't sink in until the experience, a very supernatural experience or experiences started happening to me. And there I really was like, oh my goodness, oh my God, it's really true. So yeah, I'm gonna start first by going over, you know, my whole history. So I'm from New York. I grew up in the States. I came to Europe about at the age of 23. Now that I can look back at certain things that happened when I was growing up, I can also even pinpoint and attribute certain dreams and certain experiences and say, that looked like that was the Matrix trying to deter me. Because when I was in New York, I was very weak, very insecure. I didn't really talk up much. In fact, when I returned back to New York after living 5 years in Barcelona the first time, my hairstylist, I would go to the hair salon to get my hair done, and they knew me from before, and then they saw me when I came back with my daughter, and they told me, wow, you're so different now. Like, before you used to be like a quiet little mouse, like you didn't used to talk, and it showed that because I had left, I had grown a lot as far as my personality and security, because I even noticed that when I went back to visit and I saw one of my childhood friends, for example, she was still exactly the same the way I left her, in the sense that she was still insecure about certain things that I felt that were things that, of course, we would have been insecure about in high school, but now we were past college. We were now like adults. So it kind of like shocked me a little bit, because I was like, ooh, she didn't change. Like, she's still worried about how she looks in this dress or how she looks in that. Like, so I just kind of noted that, but I just said, well, that's the way she is. But I definitely had a very big transformation, and it definitely was noticed by my mom, because I do say that she is a narcissist, and I do say that people who are narcissistic are suffering with an attachment of some kind of demonic entity on them, okay? And you could fight me on that one, but I will die hard on that point. That is a demonic possession or a demonic attachment, okay? And I even recalled, like, now when I go looking back at so many things, I recall a dream that I had, like, when I was like 16, and I always remember this dream, and I just kind of played it off, and I thought it was a dream, but I've always been a very big dreamer. So, but it's a dream that I remembered because it was like I had seen her in the dream, and she was like dancing naked in the dream, and her remark to me was, make sure you don't have a demon in you. That was ironic, because I woke up from the dream and I really didn't know how to interpret that. I was just like, that was weird. But narcissists in general like to project. So I don't know if that dream was as if it was like a message, whatever dream character was impersonating her or whatever. But that idea was that the things that she was doing in the dream would have been maybe deemed something kind of demonic, no? Like dancing naked, kind of like a marine spirit or something like that. But yet, she projected it back to me. So that was already my take from the time she was younger, from the time I was younger, I'm sorry. And she was younger, right? But I went through a lot of spiritual warfare, because my daughter's father, his family has a long little history of destiny swapping, and they're very involved in, witchcraft and these kind of things. So I do feel, because ironically, when I was in the States, and I know that my daughter's father and the other woman that he was with, was in Dominican Republic, whatever, she was very envious of my daughter. Our daughters were basically like 1 week apart, same year and everything, okay? And there was a moment on one occasion where I was having a dream. And in my dream, I had dreamt that there was a mob of people and they were attacking this very tall, gigantic man. And in the dream, I understood like he was like Haitian, okay? But they had like hacked him to death or something, like but he was a giant. And all of a sudden, he apparently was dead, but the next thing, it was as if he was like a grasshopper and he kind of just did like a flip and like lifted himself up in a like very strange way, as if like you were laying down and you just kind of like put your feet down on the ground and push the rest of your body up. It was like the weirdest thing. So it was kind of like a resuscitation or I don't know. He just came back to life and he was a giant and he went walking, right? So someone woke up, basically, is what I interpreted, a soul to, they woke up a dead to give him probably a job to do witchcraft, whatever. That's how I interpreted it, right? So that was part of the dream. And then in another part of the dream, it was very strange because it was as if I was like in a hospital. And then there was a man and he was white and he had brown hair and he had like a mustache. His mustache kind of looked like, I don't know if you know the artist Dolly. It was this kind of mustache that curled in a very strange way in the dream. And he came close to me and he said, "Your mother's dead now," And I woke up from that dream. And I woke up from that dream. It interrupted my dream because I heard my mother in the other room with my daughter, who was also taking a nap, having a nightmare. So we were both having nightmares in a way, except I think hers was a little bit more like a sleep paralysis. But I heard her crying out as best as she could. When you're in a sleep paralysis state, you can't really talk. So she was making these kind of like, like moaning sounds, like that something was wrong. So that was what woke me up and interrupted my dream. And when I went in and I woke her up and I was like, "What's going on? What happened?" And she said, "Oh my goodness, I saw an older lady in slippers and she looks just like, an old granny from DR. And she had her hand reaching out and, my mom was sleeping and my daughter had been laying on her chest also sleeping on top of her because I think she was like less than 1 year old at that time. And she said to me, "You got to be careful, these families you get involved with," because she had felt that the lady was there after my daughter. Whatever was her impression, it seemed as if that entity was there trying to reach out for my daughter. After that, my daughter did have nightmares and stuff like that. Like, we went through the lot of the witchcraft, spiritual warfare, and all that. Okay? And like I said, from the way I even met my daughter's father, it was just like not serendipity. I maybe thought it was in the moment, but knowing how the matrix works, and the matrix, everything is the matrix and the matrix is everything. There's no coincidences, right? So I remember I met him because I used to hang out with his cousin. We used to go out dancing a lot. And that night we were supposed to go dancing, but instead she chose to switch up and say, "Hey, let's go to a bar." And it was at that bar that he just happened to be sitting there, her cousin, right? So I can see now that was definitely, probably prepared, all right, for me to meet him. And the thing was that his purpose or his role, because the way I ended up back in New York was that he wanted to go to New York. I really didn't want to leave the Mediterranean. He wanted to leave the Mediterranean, and he convinced me. And after he got me there, that's where I had the dream with my father coming in the dream. And, he came in the dream. And I know some people will say, well, when you dream with these people that they look like your relatives, but they're not your real relatives, that they're demons. And I do believe in some cases there are, that this is the case. But I know for a fact that was my father and mine. And he felt a lot of sadness, and I think it was because he was seeing the situation I was in. And I had dreamt him a lot in that year, or those 2 years after he died, because he was actively, I think, trying to protect me from a lot of the things that they were sending at me, via witchcraft. And so, I remember in that dream specifically, he came very sad, and he told me, and I felt it when I woke up, and he said, Dahlia, and he said, I love you. He was seeing everything, and probably that was happening around me that I still wasn't aware of. And, I really felt that. So as soon as I got to New York, and I finally got the apartment, and I finally got everything together, because, I had transitioned, I had left everything. Yeah, her father picked up and he left. And after that, I met my son's father. We got married and everything, but there came a point where I was just like, I really wasn't happy in New York, especially after living 5 years in the Mediterranean. It's a very different lifestyle. You go back, everybody's different, and everything had changed. My mom, like I said, definitely noticed that I had grown spiritually, and the narcissistic, how should I say, personality, or the way that she viewed me, she always attributed to as I was being disrespectful, but I wasn't. It was that she was used to being able to control and dominate me in a certain way, and because she saw that it wasn't possible, she definitely, we definitely had very big clashes because of that. And I feel that perhaps I chose her to be my mother because, yes, she was very educated. She was able to put me through school so that I can get the education I need to get certain perspectives. But had I stayed with her, the whole purpose, I think, of what a narcissist tries to do is to shut you down. Okay? So you can grow from it later, but the purpose is to shut you down, to keep you quiet, to keep you insecure, to keep you dominated, not for you to grow. So, now I can look back at it, and I always will say that whether he is a real NPC, my daughter's father, or he is some kind of entity that's, in cahoots with whatever's going on, his purpose was to pull me out of the Mediterranean and put me back into the States, where I could be bombarded with a lot of distractions, under my mother, under this kind of, criticism, all these criticisms and this kind of relationship, so that my awakening would never blossom the way it has blossomed here, living in the Mediterranean. Okay? So I went back to Spain, okay, and, I, started from the bottom all over again, because I had left everything, my apartment, everything, and I had to build, and, we weren't rich, we had to start over. I was a single mom now, going back to the Mediterranean, back to Spain, Barcelona, with 2 children, and we got the best studio that we could afford after living in rooms and with ex-in-laws and all of this. And unfortunately, it was in a very bad street, right? So I'm not gonna lie, I do believe a lot in sexual sin being an entryway for the enemy to get access to you. And I had started a relationship with a man who was living in the building. And I don't know, his wife, who really didn't live in the building with him, but she would be having, she was a drug addict. She was crazy, and she would, they would do these loud scenes and all of this, a lot of distractions, typical NPC Matrix stuff, right? It didn't have anything to do with me per se, right? But I don't know how it turned out, but I recalled one day, me and my kids, we went out, whatever, we're out there, in the, they were rollerblading, and we come back, and there were a lot of guys that used to be hanging out in the corner. All these men were like basically like little like drug dealers. Like in Barcelona, there's a very big problem with this, right? So I saw when we were coming back, we went into the supermarket, there was nobody there. We come back out, it looked like Gaza. There were police everywhere. So now I'm just like looking, because I'm looking to see like who's getting arrested here, like which neighbors are getting arrested, because this was that kind of street and neighborhood where like, I lived in the Raval, so it was notorious for crime back in 2020. And this was also, keep in mind, right after COVID. This was when there was that shift, right? COVID came out, and they tried quickly to get everybody vaccinated. So that was going on. And obviously me and my children, we did not get vaccinated. Okay. So then, we come out of the supermarket and we start walking to our apartment. And I looked behind me, and I saw that there were these police officers, like they were coming behind me. And I was actually coming close to my building to tell the other neighbor, I'm like, hey, did you see what's going on back there? Because there was like a truck blocking our street, so the people couldn't really see what was going on perpendicular. And the police, I noticed, and I will always remember that when I looked back and I saw them, it was as if they were walking close behind me. And because I looked back, it was like they tried to slow it down. So it did look like they were kind of like following me, but they didn't want to come too close behind. So I went into the building, and as I go into the building, I hear that, the police ask the neighbor outside, can they go into the building? And they go into the mailboxes looking for stuff, blah, 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 making noise. All right. So I go upstairs. I hear one of these NPC troublemakers downstairs saying, what if it's her that's leading the police? Very strangely, right? And from there, that's where the narrative took off. Okay, that's where the narrative took off. And all of a sudden, these men started making commotions, accusing me. Now that I can look back at it, you could say like, well, that is strange. But accusing me and intertwining and saying that, well, the one that was the drug addict lady, she was like also participating and saying things, and they just kind of like prepared the narrative. But even from that point, there was a moment where they claimed they had put a camera in my apartment for the short, because after that happened, I think I was only in the apartment for like a week or two, the max, because it was, they were like threatening and menacing, and that was a street that men used to be fighting with like machetes and stuff like that. So you could understand my concern. So the one of the neighbors, when they started to say, yeah, it's probably her, would sit outside, and they that's where it started, because it was exactly the same tactic of talking so that you can overhear. And they were pretending, looking on a phone, pretending that they can see everything inside of my apartment, and that they saw me doing this and they saw me doing that. Okay? And I don't know. It could be possible. I felt like, well, because many times we would leave the house without locking the door, in that sense, because it was a building, we never really felt like anybody was per se going to go in. It was a little bit after that I think I heard from other neighbors that like someone tried to like break into his apartment upstairs and all that. But this was a building that for the most part, the floors that were underneath used to sell, drug paraphernalia and all that. And then the rest of the apartments upstairs were Airbnbs. So it was like, there were only like several permanent residents and me and maybe the lady in front of me and the man who lived upstairs from me. We were like the only like decent like individuals in that building for the most part, right? Not involved in any shenanigans, besides the tourists. And yeah, that was the first time that that scenario happened, where they were outside, they were talking, etc., 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 and they were appearing as if they can see in my apartment. And like I said, I would go out sometimes and I wouldn't really lock it because since I didn't really have anyone to hold my key, and then I think once I let someone in the building hold my key, so that they can go in, because we had to pay one summer like 90 euros to get back in our apartment because I locked myself out. So they could basically have taken like a soda bottle and just open the door if they wanted to go in and do all of that, right? One day when I was maybe in the park with my kids. So I bought it. Okay, I bought it. Fast forward, I moved. I'm in another apartment, not in the same neighborhood. It was after I started like trying to hold the NPCs accountable, because this lady who is in the street, she had an altercation with me, and I decided I was going to press charges. I was like, she just came up to me, and I was like walking with my daughter in the street, and it was just like like a hula balloon. And I said, oh, I'm going to press charges. So when it was time for the trial was when it was amped up, because I was holding the NPCs accountable. And you will notice, if you are being gang stalked or targeted, anytime you got proof that these NPCs are up to no good, they will try to do other things to amp up the distractions so that you turn your vision from one thing to another. And I'm going to give an example of that, how that happened with my job and everything, right? So I move, but I'm in the same neighborhood. Because of course I still don't know like what I'm dealing with. I'm just saying like, okay, I'm not talking to this person anymore. I'm not talking to that person anymore. So the trial comes. Now that rumor of me being a snitch starts getting spread around the whole neighborhood. And I can tell who's spreading it based on the demographics, because it's going from one demographic to another, to another, to another. And this takes place over the period of like 3 years. By the third year, I wasn't even talking to anybody yet. I had already been like keeping to myself, because I was like noticing things, and like certain women that I was like friends with were like doing strange things, like to try to sabotage you. Like, so they will send NPCs and people to try to sabotage and set you up. So I was not aware of that, but I was noticing obviously that, I was smart enough and I had very good instinct, and I was like noticing like strange behavior from people who I thought were like friends of mine and stuff and things like that, right? But now that I can look back, I'm going to talk to you about before I moved from that entire neighborhood, okay? I'm going to tell you about what I started to notice with the jobs. So I had been at a job for 2 years, like not teaching. I was actually working as a lunch lady in a Catholic school, right? Because at that time I had my last daughter, and of course, obviously, I'm the type of person, like, I like to stay home with my children when they're born. I'm a teacher with a BA in education. I've worked in early childhood, but I've also worked a lot in nurseries, okay? And I will always advocate for mothers, staying home with your child at least until they're able to speak, or at least until they're 2, Of course, I know not everyone can do that, but anyways. So I wasn't really working full time, so I had the time. So that means I wasn't making a lot, okay? And this is important because this has to do with the targeting and the aspect of keeping targeted individuals poor, okay? You're okay if you're not making a lot of money most of the time. It's when you really start to pull in the big bucks is when you'll start to notice that it also amps up, especially in employment. So I was fine at that job, but then as I was teaching also English in the afternoons. So by the time, it was like 2023, I wasn't talking to anyone. I was keeping to myself because I noticed I was like, all these women are kind of, shady and doing this and that in that area. So I stopped talking to them. I was kind of sticking to myself. I had gotten a little bit of a glow up. I'm not going to lie. And I had started talking to another individual, and he wasn't even from that neighborhood, but he was from the demographics of one of the main groups that lived in that area, right? And I don't like to base it on demographics because people who aren't aware of the Matrix and NPCs, like they're going to think about it from a racial perspective. And it doesn't matter in that sense because I've understood, obviously, that 8 billion people in this world and only like a small percentage of all of those people have souls. So you're going to have them in every single race. But in the Mediterranean, I will say that there is an agenda that they're using one demographic in particular, I feel, to exacerbate problems and situations and make it like, political, like for their agenda, right? Because could you imagine that you are from this region or one of these countries where you have a specific religion that has a lot of stronghold over the people and these kind of very restrictive traditions, especially if you're a woman, and you're the only one that maybe notices, oh, this seems strange or that seems strange, but then you got a whole bunch of NPCs around you that are ready to enforce those traditions. And that's what the Matrix does. It's using, I feel, in this area, that demographic to maintain and suppress any kind of spiritual awakening, especially for women, any kind of liberating ideas, repressed. And not only within certain countries, I'll say like towards the north of Africa, but also around that region. And this is why I feel like they have been so much in cahoots with a lot of the things that I've seen in my narrative. You know what I mean? Because like I said, it's not about race. It's a spirit that's working behind the surface. We're battling principalities. So anyways, so I'm talking to this guy for like 6 months. That was the one that he said, wait for me in front of my house. And I wait in front of his house. All of a sudden, these men just show up and they claim they see me standing in front of his house. And now, technically, there's nothing really going on in his house in that area. I used to live in that area in the first 5 years before I went back to New York. So I kind of knew the area, and that was also where I was working. There were other areas that were worse. But in general, that area, in particular in front of his house, there was really nothing going on. But again, because of the narrative, and I had been, labeled a snitch in my narrative from the first apartment, and then I was in this apartment, and, it was like, I was buying it up until that point. But, so they said they saw me standing there, and all of a sudden, for you to see, it's a different area, so it was very strange. The people who were in my area now started talking so I can hear them outside the window, loud, saying, well, they said they saw her standing there. So now I'm really buying this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like what was going on? Why did those men stop and look at me like that? And because it was very evident, like they came to see me or catch me stopping there. And one of them actually looked like they were feeling sorry for it. This is why I say you have NPCs and you do have parasitic demonic entities that are attaching to NPCs. And the way I always explain this works is that imagine you have a shoe, right? We are vessels. The same way you might have an angel, in someone, or angels can appear. You have demonic entities that also take over these vessels. And if the majority of these vessels are empty because they have no consciousness and they are just NPC, it's very easy. So, that's my take on it. So some individuals, obviously, the ones with consciousness or something, they might feel bad, but they are being led. You think it's normal. You see everybody is doing certain things. You don't know everybody's an NPC around you. So you just, you might be the only one to maybe stand up and say, like, this is wrong. And everybody else around you is like, that's normal. So you go along with the program, right? And I could see in his face that he looked like he was, like, regretful of it. But anyways, so around my house, they started a commotion. And before that, I will say, from my job, back to my job. I had been there 2 years. Very strangely, the last month before I had to leave, one of the coworkers started acting really weird, like doing strange things, and had the kids who were the high school students in on it, also doing strange things on their phones, as if they were writing something. And I was thinking, like, is he telling them to report me or something? Does he want my position? It was so strange. It was so strange. It was like creepy, because I had been talking to this man. We had been at the job the same amount of time, and he seemed like, he did yoga. He seemed like he was very awake. And I don't know what they had on him. I don't really know if he was an NPC or they just had something on him that they could, make him participate. I don't know what it was. And I want to say that a lot of times, just in case, the Matrix will send people who seem to have so much in common with you, that they sometimes seem to be as awake as you. But all of this is just kind of to butter you up, to have like your worst enemy close to you. And this is particularly the reason why I just don't talk to anybody. At the time, I was like, what is going on? So I decided, seeing all that anyways, that I was going to change jobs, because I wasn't making a lot anyways. My daughter was already in kindergarten or pre-K. So I was like, okay, I'm going to, go ahead and pick up more hours. So I'm going to leave this job anyways. Like, you know when to leave, right? And so I left that job, but I was left with that impression. So I went to another nursery. I went to a nursery, basically, to work first. And I can't say anything weird happened there. Like, all of the women just were, like, very negative energy, very low vibrational, except for, like, one that I kind of, used to talk to. And I had been fasting. I had been praying. And eventually, I had also been applying to many schools, and one school called me back right around January. So I left that school and I went to go work at a very good school. And at that time, I thought that I had hit the jackpot, because if you know anything about Spain, the salaries are very low. And teachers, police officers make about, maybe, if you're lucky, 2,300 per month, okay? And that's a good salary, because the average person is making maybe 1,000, working maybe 6 days a week. And the nursery school where I was working, they had to increase my income, because they even wanted me to start at like 1,000 and something, and I made them raise it to like 1,500. So, the salaries are low. So when you're making that amount, there's a lot of competition. There's this kind of, idea that like you have to really fight for your job. That's the mentality. And now that okay, so I'll go into it, but after leaving there is when I said to myself, and I look back and I say, oh my goodness, like, there are people out here making 5,000, 7,000 a month. Like, that's nothing. You know what I mean? But because you think it's a lot of money as a professional, people are afraid of their reputation, of doing this, of doing that, of being themselves. And a lot of the teachers that were in that school, especially because it was a prestigious school, and they wanted to stay in that job, like, they were going to therapy and everything. They were depressed. Like, a lot of things that I feel are based on the fact that, like, lack of self-expression and, whatever. But that's the kind of energy that you find in those kind of jobs, right? So, yeah, before I got that job in the nursery, I had already started having dreams a little bit before, that guy who I had been speaking to for 6 months set me up with. The neighbors also were like doing strange things, knocking out the TV and saying they need to fix the antenna, but they need my key because I'm always and I just was like, I'm not giving my key to anybody anymore, So after that happened and he set me up, I was already, it was a summer. The nursery job was going to be into September. The summer job, I was working reception, to also like try to get extra money. And I was actually looking like decent. I will admit I was looking decent, after having kids. I was out of my frumpy stage and all that. I was looking good. And I was working reception. This is the only reason why I'm mentioning it, because those kind of jobs, they're very superficial in that sense. Like, they want like people with good presence and all of that in Barcelona. So, you know, when that happened, even in front of my job, because it was in the same area, people were coming in front of the building, the apartment building. I was the receptionist in the ground floor, and they were talking outside of the glass so that I can hear them, saying all sorts of things. And they were also people from my culture, So this was, like I said, it was just being propagated, amongst all the little NPCs, and to the point where they freaked me out so much on one occasion in front of that job when I was in there with my kids, that I had to call the police, because I swear I thought that they were going to attack me. And after the police escorted me out of the building, I heard, as we passed by, and my kids can testify to that, people laughing, like they thought it was funny. Like they thought somebody else obviously thought it was funny. One of the police officers once, when I went to say, I don't know, like people, I don't know if they're hacking my WhatsApp or they're hacking this. He told me, change your number, because, they're not going to probably do anything, but they're going to keep you as the laughing stock. I don't know if he had a soul or not. I don't know if he was an NPC and he already knew what was going on and he was just kind of giving me a heads up, but whatever. I said, you know what? Yeah. So I left that apartment. I had to rent booking apartments until I could, get a new apartment. And my kids had to go stay with a very close friend of mine. And I was sleeping in someone's sofa. And like I said, you could see also that for me was like an impact of witchcraft, because maybe a couple months before that happened, I had really started fasting and doing my 3 a.m. prayers. And I had even had dreams where someone who fit the description of the same little old lady that my mother claimed that she had dreamt about had come and told me, like, I don't need to pray so much. And when she told me that in the dream, she came with like no face. And I am a type of person, like, I always see faces in dreams. I always see the person I'm talking to. It was as if like she tried to cover her face, so like she was unidentifiable. And when she told me that, like, you best believe that I started praying even harder, because who would tell you you don't need to pray that much except for a demon? And so all of that had been going on, right? The dreams had been kind of giving me warnings, a lot of premonitions. And the way we were separated after we had to move from there, the cats were still in the apartment. Someone was going to feed them. Like I said, my kids were up someplace else by my friend. I was in someone else's couch in another area. Complete division. Like someone said, let's do a spell work to just completely divide up that household. All right? As much confusion as possible. And afterwards, eventually, I found an apartment. From the time I got that apartment, I could swear to you, and I thought it was in my head, but now I see it wasn't. I got the apartment in a very small town, out of the way, in the boondocks. Very nice area. And like I said, an area where there's hardly any transportation. I had to take 2 hours to go down to my job, 2 hours to come back up into the city, and from the city. And I was leaving at like 6 a.m. to get to work at like 8, and coming home also at 8 o'clock. So really, it was as if my kids really lived in that town, because I was really just in the city, going up and down on buses and all that. But when I got that apartment, it was interesting, because I got that apartment. It almost felt like coincidental. That's how it usually is. The apartments that I always get, it seemed to be like whoever helps. Like I said, and this is why I said not every NPC I think is necessarily bad, because there's some that obviously help. And I'm going to give more examples of that later on when I go into like my other experiences. But so I got this apartment, and as I was pulling away with the agent who was showing me the apartment, I swear I overheard someone from a distance say, "Oh, they're going to kill her, ha 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 ha," from a distance. And this was in the small town. But I played it off. I said, no, it can't be. Maybe they're talking about something else. Maybe I'm just paranoid already, but it was as if like they were referring to me. I felt that was my instinct because I was the only one on that block with the agent going to see this apartment. Mind you, this is a small town, and even though in that area, in that small town was where maybe more of the poor individuals lived, okay, because that's how I could get the apartment, because obviously I can't pay for something, extravagant as a single mom with 4 children and all that. There wasn't this kind of crime or anything going on back there, okay? So eventually, we were there for a period of time. I started working at a prestigious school. Right around towards the end of the year, I get these premonitions again. A lot of premonitions. One with my daughter's father trying to make me sign a contract in the dream and feeding me like a chocolate brownie. And unfortunately, I am no good for these kind of dreams. Like, I really wish that I could have more authority in the dream. So what I do sometimes is I actually pray and I say, God, whatever kingdom helpers or dream characters that there are in my dreams, help me so I don't eat in these dreams, or help me so I don't like do anything weird like that, like signing things, because these kind of dreams are completely demonic, right? I was having dreams with the same little old lady trying to make me light candles, like to do rituals, trying to make me pay for rituals. So things that I was not involving myself with, because you see, when this was happening originally in the past, I, before, was very into the tarot. I was going to see babalaos. I was going to see basically people who worked with Santeria to help me kind of fight against all of these witchcraft that I knew was being sent in my direction. I wasn't praying. I was fighting fire with fire. So that was an issue. And that it's very clear that that was an issue, because the fact that in the dream, that's what they were trying to coax me into doing in the dream, to come into agreement with them, when at that moment I was praying, means that the more you participate in those things and fighting fire with fire, the more you're giving access to the enemy, you see. So the fact that I wasn't anymore going to these people, it was as if like now they can't get me, even though like they know that I know that what they're doing, but I'm not responding to it that way. It's like they have no access to me, and it was frustrating them. So they tried to do it through my dream. And every time they tried to, for example, in this case, make me light the candle, it was as if it would be blown out. And there's a passage in the Bible about that the candle or the fire of every sinner will be blown out, or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact scripture, but there is a scripture that talks about this, okay? So in the dream, it wasn't even lighting, okay? So that wasn't going to happen. So they couldn't get me that way. And the dream characters I remember in that dream were even like looking at me like, they were looking at me very clearly like, she's not supposed to be here. Like something's going on. Like they have her doing something in this whatever realm, whatever was going on, that they know that I'm sleeping and I'm not really consciously doing whatever was meant to be done. So anyways, that's going into the spiritual. So we're going to go back into the physical. So I started having a lot of premonitions about like signing contracts. I had a premonition about leaving the job at the prestigious school, which was very strange because they had given me a contract that in theory I could have stayed there for a long time. But very strangely, again, a weird rumor, or I don't know, I thought it was that they had seen my TikToks talking about, my spiritual stuff. They started making rumors or whispering, I guess, and acting very strange. So I don't know also if it was like for the position, because there was also competition. There weren't going to be the same amount of classes. They were going to move around all the teachers. So it's a little mix of that. So I wasn't exactly sure, but I knew there was a lot of whispering going around specifically about me, like to further make the decision clear, even if there was competition, right? And I was like, okay, whatever. I was disappointed because I was working, making a lot of money. We were going on vacations. I was like, finally, I had a nice apartment. And I said, finally, I'm working a very good job. I'm very happy. And now, I lost the job. But I said, well, let's see. I went again on another fast. I was praying. And even by that summer, before that summer even ended, I already was, I was teaching second grade in the first school, the prestigious school, and then in the second school, they called me to do kindergarten. And it was in another location, but like nearby, making just as much. So I was very ecstatic. And, I just thought it was weird how everyone started doing that, like just the last 2 weeks of my job. And this is why I know now, looking back, that what was happening even before that had started really from the spring of 2023, when it started to amp up, because the awakening was coming. These NPCs, these demonic entities, that they know the astrology, and I'm very sure that when they do certain things to you, and I feel that this is the case, like when they ramp up certain things, it has to do and coincide with a lot of astrological factors, like when they know that these energetic shifts are happening so that you can't take advantage of them. So anyhow, I say, okay, I get another job, we go about our business, and that summer 2024 is when all of a sudden the same phenomena, like what was happening in the old neighborhood, starts happening. The people behind my house start talking, whatever, saying things so that you can overhear them, acting as if they can see into your apartment again, saying specific things so that you are aware. Now, I don't know, because I never changed the lock on my door in this building when I moved in. The only person that supposedly had the key, in this case, no one else had the key, was the owner. And I had cameras. I put in the cameras when they started with that nonsense just to double check, okay? But yet they were claiming that they could see into the apartments, okay? Or not claiming, they were speaking to make you aware, like that they can see everything you're doing, right? And saying things. And they did this more towards the end because, like I said, this started from the summer, and I ignored it because I said, you know what, I have a good job. We are very happy in this apartment. These trashy people back here are not going to upset my life, and I have nothing to do with them. I don't even talk to anybody back here. I don't even know anybody back here. So it was strange to me. But I said, well, maybe because there are people from certain demographic, and, people in Barcelona know each other. Maybe they're spreading the rumor up here where I live. That was my reasoning, okay? So I ignored it completely, but still taking account a lot of things. And I dreamt it. I dreamt from the time I entered that apartment. The first dream I had was with one of the neighbors that would later on be one of the people who were participating in the gang stalking, okay? I had dreamt these neighbors before even seeing them, and I was really spot on because they weren't Spanish. They were Eastern European, and I had dreamt people who seemed like very, very fair-skinned, blonde, that they were tricking me, knocking on my door, asking, to speak to me. In the dream, supposedly, it was very late in the evening, and there was like a crack under the door, so that when I looked under the door, I didn't see people. I saw something that looked like some kind of hooves, as if they belonged to like a goat, but with a skirt on. So I could see like a skirt and two hooves of some kind of animal. But when I opened the door, don't ask me why I opened the door, because like I said, I'm no good for these dreams. It was these neighbors in front of the house. I opened my door and cracked it open a little bit. They sent in a dog that began to, that fit through that little crack space and began to attack my cats. And then I had an array of dreams of dogs trying to attack my cats. And that, again, was related to witchcraft. So there were a lot of things occurring. And, I always say, well, it's my daughter's father also. But keep in mind that a lot of these demonic societies, these people who control society, they also are involved a lot in the occult. So, many factors here. Why are they all participating in the gang state? Because they're all NPCs. People always say, oh, they bought out my neighbor. Yeah, they might in NPC land, pay them money, whatever. But they're all NPCs. They all work for the Matrix. And if you notice, they always seem like they're calling someone back when you catch them in anything. And I always say to myself, like, who are you calling? Satan? Like, who are you calling? They always are quick to get on their phones. They're NPCs. So this is not like, oh, my brother turned against me. Unfortunately, we have, and we are surrounded by people who do not have souls. So it's very easy that it could be your brother or your aunt or this person or that person, because that is the situation that we are in, period. And so anyways, so I had a dream about that, but I dismissed it. And then my kids also had dreams about the neighbors. So we were all having our own little awakening, okay? And I ignored it from maybe the summer of June 2024 until December 2024, until I couldn't handle it anymore. And the only reason, it wasn't really because of what was happening behind my house, but within a month's time, this time at the new job, I started noticing people started whispering. Keep in mind that at both of these jobs, I had a completely different number. So for them to really look for me on a TikTok or something, like, they would really have to be searching. And I didn't talk to any of my coworkers, so they didn't really have any connection with me. They couldn't know anything about me per se. And nothing that I was saying was like, I think that outrageous, unless like they think like teachers shouldn't be talking about spirituality, because it does feel like that a lot in the Mediterranean, like that you have to kind of be really in this kind of box, especially in Spain. If you're a teacher, like, you're expected to really be your very boring, mundane, square, fit into the status quo personality. Okay, which is very different from New York, because I remember growing up, I had teachers that were teaching me, and then supposedly they had jobs waitressing on the weekend and working at Home Depot on the weekend. Like, in Spain, that was kind of like very strange. That would be very strange, right? So think of it that way. So not only could you not make extra money because you're not making a lot of money, but it's like they feel, I guess, like if you're supposed to be a professional, you can't do other jobs, which is very strange to me. And I even remember speaking to someone, like, she wanted to study, she'd studied something for her bachelor's degree, and she wanted to study something else for her master's, similar but a little bit different, and they would not let her because she couldn't switch, which I thought was weird, because in the States you usually can do these kind of changes without a problem. But there's this kind of rigid mentality in that sense when it comes to certain things here. So anyways, so within a month's time of working at the new employment, I started seeing people whispering, and it was like very weird because, like I said, it was a different environment. Everybody kind of kept to themselves. Very different. And I didn't understand what was going on. I just ignored it as well. But I started to notice that when I was focusing too much on the neighbors, because there was actually an altercation where one of the NPCs slipped up and actually pulled my niece's arm. And I had to go file a report, because now, whether people believe that I'm being gang stalked or not, but I have a testimony from the child that this neighbor actually did put her hands on her. She slipped up. She was an older lady NPC. And I wouldn't really have cared, like going out of my way to go put to go file a report. But if something were to happen later on, then that would be the first thing they would say, right? Like, why didn't you file a report if this happened? So you have to also, have some kind of proof. So, but because I know what the old lady was doing, because she was participating, she was like the lookout to see when I was like leaving, when I was coming back. Because if it was just like some other old lady, maybe I might not have cared, because a lot of old ladies in the Mediterranean like to be touching on people and, hi, sweetie, and how are you? So it's not a really big deal. You know what I mean? But because I knew what they were doing, I said, I'm going to file the report. And yeah, they got like a lot of the neighbors in on it back there. And you would think like how, and I did in the moment, I was like, how are they getting all these people to participate? Like who's this rich to be offering that kind of money? And, all these questions, because remember, my narrative started out in this kind of, poor neighborhood with a certain social class of people, ghetto area. And now I'm in a different area. And I'm like, who is intermingling? And it was a different demographic. So I'm like, who's intermingling with these people? Like, how are they, whatever. So that's when I started to say, like, things are not making sense. So at the new employment at my job, and I swear to you, because this is what the NPCs do, they will do things, and this is what makes me upset and why I want to make sure that this comes out. They try to make people who expose this seem crazy, and they can do that because imagine they're like cyborgs. Imagine, I mean, they're not cyborgs, but you know what I mean. They kind of are. So imagine like like you see in the movies and you think they're normal people, and then if they want to, they could just like turn on a switch and all start acting weird around you. And if you actually were to say like, oh my God, she's doing this and she did that, then you look crazy. You know what I mean? So that's some nasty work. That's a mean little trick. That's a little dirty trick of the enemy, right? So that's also, I feel like, what for people who are awakening, who are being targeted, for you to go back and fall back asleep. You'll end up going to get medication and going to therapy, and everybody's going to tell you like, no, it's you. And you're going to fall back into the matrix. You're going to go back into that slumber. So it's a way of making you feel like that awakening, that you're actually interacting with that frequency, that now you can see them, is not what you think it is. It's some kind of mental illness, all right? Anyways, so I go to this job. People start like, whispering within a month's time, like giving you the kind of strange looks, right? They were probably NPC, especially, like I said, now the ones that especially are the ones saying and knowing what you're saying in your house and doing, some of them are, okay? Because like I said, and this is what I always say when it comes to target individuals, don't care what people think if you feel like people are looking at you in your house and all that. Because if it's only these NPCs from NPC land watching you, they're doing it in their heads. They are not doing anything with cameras most of the time. And, there's a Black Mirror episode, I don't know if it was the second season that came out, called The Entire History of You, okay? And it's ironic because in that episode, the people can rewind certain details of things that they've done, and many people who have been targeted talk about this, that is as if like it takes, when you get into their frequency, when you get into their zone, it's as if they take a moment and they have to like rewind in their minds and see things. So don't worry about those aspects, and this will help you a lot to like not care at all. Okay, these are just steps into not caring, because people who are real and have souls, they don't even know what's going on. And those are the only people that you need to be concerned about, people who are like you with souls, okay? NPC land and the cyborgs, that leave them to their business. Anywho, so I would notice that at the job. They would send some of the NPC teachers to come at me, ask me strange questions, especially because I didn't talk to them and I didn't make conversation with them. And they would ask me like, "Oh, how are your kids? How is this?" And it was kind of like, and I took it. I understood that part, that it was like menacing, like, you're focusing so much time at the people behind your house, so now they're going to try to ruffle your feathers at your job. And at your job they had, it was the cook in the job voice, someone who sounded like him. And it was as if through the vent, someone was speaking. And I had heard about this technology from other people, but I had never had that experience happen. And it only happened once. And I was like, what in the world? And I had even told my boss previously before that, I'm like, these vents just started working because it was like an air conditioning. And they hadn't been working. And I know I didn't turn it on. And all of a sudden they were like being turned on. And, so like I said, all in cahoots, because no one's going to go into your property and tamper with this or that, but there's a lot of NPCs running around. So what can I tell you? They would like to be in trucks in front of places as if like they're fixing things or doing things like that. And I even heard some of them outside say, because I have very good hearing, say like, "Oh my God, this girl every single day she's learning more and more," something like that. They made some kind of comment like that, right? So they would get the NPC teachers that were there to also participate, and you could see that they were scared. They were scared when I started discovering what was going on, because one thing about them is they work for the system and they believe in the system. So they are very coward anytime they get caught. And you will notice that if you are able to get them, that's when they try to start ramping up other distractions around you to kind of, give you a hard time so that you don't catch on to them. The Pope was opening doors there for the Jubilee. You don't know what really is being released out here. Something's going on out here. The parasitic entities, I feel, they don't want to be found out. And I feel like they are especially possessing certain demographics, especially like I said, and they don't want to be found out. One of the teachers, the actual assistant that I had, tried to come out and participate, like right in front of me. I ignored it because I didn't understand what was going on, but I definitely knew that whatever it was now, especially since I heard one of them make a remark, say like, oh, did you hear that the police officer came and, someone was contacting them because of course they're handlers amongst the NPCs. And, they're being told what to do. So I really, obviously now, at least I knew that whatever the narrative is about me being a snitch, like, it's not adding up, because now we have a whole different demographic. And now we have, supposedly now, it was the police participating. So now this is getting, like, a little bit interesting. Whatever. So now you already know you can't go to them. Well, you never can go to them because they're always part of the problem. But you know what I mean. You definitely can't go to them to tell them anything. Okay? And to the point, because it was a bit around Christmas holiday, when I decided I wasn't just going to go back, because from the town, they put women from the town, not my town, because like I said, the NPCs, they don't want to be found out. They put the ones from the other town on the bus. I had an experience. I didn't still understand what was going on. But all of a sudden, all of the women chimed in all together, all these little old Spanish ladies, talking and saying everything as if they were talking about me. And like I said, now we're on a different age level. Not everyone participates. Like I said, these are things that you will notice. It's not everybody doing it. Especially if you notice also people who are traveling from outside places, especially where I live. There's a lot of people who are tourists coming from, they're not participating in it. So this is something regional, and this is something that even though it's regional, not everyone is doing it. For example, I work with kids. I've never had an incident where a kid has just started randomly doing that. Teenagers, yes, here in France have been participating, the teenage NPCs, but for the most part, like, this is not something, that you say, like, well, and I even said, well, how come, when I arrived in France, but I'm skipping ahead, I was like, how come it's only happening in this area, but then when I go to my job in that area, it's not happening? And then it's only after I said that, then it started happening in that area, because, like I said, you can see certain things don't make sense. I was awakening little by little. So anyways, I even I was on the bus. These women started saying, yes, and her house looks this, and she does this, and she has a potty mouth, like saying all these things. The whole hour ride back to my little town or village, whatever, where I lived. And, I just got up and I was like, what in the world is this? I told my family, I'm like, the bus drivers are in on it. And I'm telling them, it's very weird. The bus drivers were doing like spectacles, stopping on the road on purpose. There were cars that were parked there in the middle of the road, nobody in it, and they were like making comments so that you would overhear. This is now to try to provoke as much fear as possible in you, saying that, they're going to try to get her. They're leaving cars on the road open so that they have a getaway car. And I'm listening to this, and at this point, remember, I was already fasting and praying, so fear was being rebuked on a daily basis. One of the ladies said in Catalan, she goes, oh no, all the fear has already left her. And why would she say that? Now I can look back at it and think that what an interesting comment to make, because that was what was the purpose, was to provoke the fear. I was rising above the frequency of fear. I was rising above all of these frequencies, right? So the thing that really was, I really just didn't want to be, because the last episode that they did, they try to make it seem as if there was an undercover cop who had a gun, and a little alarm went off on the bus. Like all of these spectacles, right? And they were going to try to plant something on me on the bus, you know. And that's when I was like, you know what, just for my, I work with kindergarten and I loved my kids. I was like, for my sake, I'm not going to go to work feeling unnerved, because before I go to work acting like stressed out and being like that with kids, I'd rather stay home. I was like, I'm going to just say I have stress, and I was going to try to like stay home and just collect like, I don't know, just take my days off or something. And and on top of that, when I went to the clinic with that in mind, because I said that a lot to my kids, they're like, you know what, screw these people, I swear to you, there was a man who looked almost like he was a police officer, because like now you had it as if police were after you, like weird undercover police. He came out of the office and I heard him like talking to her, and he was saying like, yeah, just in case she says something paranoid. I heard this. And he comes out of the office, and then when I get there and I'm trying to tell the doctor, yeah, give me here in Spain, when you want to take a couple days off, you have to go to the doctor. I was like, yeah, can you give me some downtime for like 4 days, 5 days, or a week, or something like this? And she was refusing. The handler had gone in and made sure to tell her not to give me that time, because they wanted me to continue to go down. They didn't want me in the town where I was at. Now, on one occasion on the bus, one of the little NPCs had said in a whispered tone, when we were coming home from religion class that we would go in the city on Saturday, she was whispering in a really weird way, because that's why I was like, what is going on? She was whispering the name of the town, and she was saying, this town is a safe town. It's a safe town. This town is safety. So I don't know if she was trying to give me a heads up, saying that I was safe here, but not in the city. Like, I don't know what was going on. Crazy things, okay? Anyways, it was the librarian of the town, but that was the funny part, because it's such a small town. Everybody knows everybody. I love the town. Like I said, I don't know what was going on, but whatever was going on, obviously, everybody in that town was not everybody, the people who were meant to harass me, the neighbors, handlers were going there to tell the NPCs what to do concerning me. So in the end, just so happens, I got my taxes back. I think it was not actually taxes, but a kind of like taxes back from the state, for paying certain things. And then my uncle had sent some money for the kids, and I had to cancel our vacations planned for the spring and the summer to get back that money. And I just said, I'm putting everything into storage, I'm picking up, and I'm leaving. How did I end up in the town where I am at? In France? It was the only town that had a booking that accepted cats. So I picked that town. It was a quiet town. It was a summer town, so it's very quiet. No, not like a lot of ghetto stuff per se at all. For the most part around here, it's pretty quiet. But the NPCs around here have been trying their hardest to mimic the exact scenarios of where I was at originally, at the studio in the bad neighborhood in Barcelona. That's the irony of it, right? So it's like a matrix, kind of like throw you back into a loop to start over again, right? And even my mom would say, every time you're getting ahead, it's like something comes along and it's like something happens and there's some commotion, like something trying not to let you get ahead. And like I said, my daughter's father, part of the matrix, using him as well with the witchcraft and all that, they're destiny swappers. So if you are a person that you carry a lot of light, or you're destined for certain things, you have leeches and these kind of parasitic entities that they want to leech off of that energy. They want to switch their destiny with you and all that, right? And his family is very well known for that. Anyways, so pick up everything, head out to this town where I'm at. We're in a booking. Same thing in the booking. Strange things. We start leaving certain time, and now we're in a different area, different demographics. And again, so now I've left that area. It started very slowly as we got here, but it increased gradually. You know what I mean? So this is why I'm saying, but if I had not left Barcelona, I wouldn't have been able to see it as clearly as I can now. Because now, yes, the narrative doesn't make any sense to the point where they don't even know what to do. They don't even know. They're in the enemy, decree and declare confusion into the camp of the enemy day and night. And may their plans be exposed in Jesus' mighty name, because they don't even know what to do. So 2 weeks in, all of a sudden, start noticing strange things. I'm at the fair with my kids. We're at this Christmas fair, because it was around Christmas. Like a whole bandwagon of police show up at the port doing nothing. And I was like, that's strange. One teenager passes by, he sees them, he sees me, and he starts laughing, smirking. Because these NPCs, like, they know what's going on. So I show it to my kids. I'm like, don't you see that's weird? Now, here's an interesting little glitch that's set up in the Matrix for me. Anytime my mom or my aunt would send me money that was not related to my actual pay for the job that I was at, the police would show up at certain random places just so that I would notice them. I swear to you. It's as if like a fear conditioning, or I don't know, a fear conditioning of some sort to me getting extra cash with the police. Okay? Not only that, you can say like, oh, that's just coincidence. There's nothing coincidence, okay? And we have had proof. We've been getting proof, things happening in my kids' school, and then the police trying to contact me, and I'm like, why would they contact me instead of the school if I wrote a letter to the school? Just strange things. Little by little, I started awakening. I started seeing things. Strange things. At the bank, they didn't want to open the bank account. They started making a new narrative that's supposedly in another ville, that I was going over there to like look around, and in that area there is crime, but in the area where I live there is no crime, and the area where I work in general, I just go to work and come back, and it's really just commercial businesses and not a lot. But they've tried so many times. They've making new narratives that don't make sense. On one hand, I would overhear they say, it's a joke, it's some kind of game. And they would play it off as if it's a game. And then on another note, they were trying to make it seem like, no, yes, it's about her being a snitch. I went from being a snitch to being an agent to being like, I don't know. So many narratives, they don't even know which one to take because it's all falling apart at this point. And I don't believe any of them. Because, you start to say, well, how would that old lady know what's going on about that kind of life? And this is a different demographic. And so they were exposing themselves little by little. In particular, I noticed also that some things that the Matrix will do to test you is like they will put someone to do something. Maybe it's something you don't like. Just so that you can maybe develop a stereotype or an idea about something or someone. And, I'll give you an example. Like maybe you're in a certain place and you see someone come and they sit at a chair next to you when there's like a lot of chairs and spaces where they could sit. But then you notice like that person comes sit next to you and they start simming, and they start doing like, simming is like doing shenanigans and things like that to get your attention, or you know what I mean? And now you're thinking, right, which a lot of people would, that in this situation, that if someone comes to sit next to you now, then the next time you already are going to be prepared because you're already going to be expecting that it's going to be the same behavior. But maybe, you never know, the person who might come the next time might be an ordinary person. So the Matrix will try to do these kind of things almost to see what your reaction is going to be. It's a way to kind of, I think, see if any kind of conditioning is working for you. And I've noticed this, that afterwards it would be like, depending on how I reacted, like if I, knowing that I know all these people are Sims and they're all doing these kind of weird things and coming up to you and trying to do this or trying to do that. But then all of a sudden, someone comes up to you and you're helping them, even though you know that they could possibly just be a Sim. But it's going to be like, I've heard like, oh, like these kind of sounds from Sims nearby who maybe were expecting me to react in a more aggressive way or act out in a negative way. But like I said, like one thing, like I know what's going on and I know maybe what these people are, but just because you know that you're living around Sims or NPCs, it doesn't mean you have to disrespect anybody. I mean, what I always say is I'm good because I know whose daughter I am. I'm the Lord's child. I'm not being nice to people in particular because of who they are. I'm being nice because of who I am in Christ. You know what I mean? So you should just try to be a good person, not because someone is watching or they have a soul or they don't. You should just always be a good person. Okay? So that's the thing. So you'll notice that they'll try to do things or things will look strange like that. And I can see it. I don't know. It's very clear that it's some kind of test to see if you're going to react in a negative way. And I wasn't going crazy like the way they wanted me to in that sense. Now, of course, I have the podcast. I talk about it. But, we could always say for entertainment purposes only. I'm actually planning on writing a book about these experiences. I'm going to label it fiction only because people are more open to accepting things when they think it's fiction. And it's called Breaking the Script. It's actually on my webpage. I'm in the works doing it, but I have a lot of projects right now, so I will discuss it and put it in writing. But it's a situation where so many narratives, they're being exposed, and I'm believing none of them. And it's just pointing more and more to something just more demonic, pointing to something more demonic and spiritual, and having nothing to do with this or that. Okay? So these are some of the experience that I had. It was only on January 20 something when I was on the bus one day. That's when I really woke up, and that was right when they supposedly said that there was a timeline shift happening. And I was thinking about something, and all of a sudden I overhear two teenagers, because like I said, in France there's been a lot of teenagers involved. Two teenagers say the same exact thing that I was thinking about. Fear conditioning, and laughing about it. And I said, oh my God, are they looking on their phones? They're reading it off their phones. And this goes along with a lot of people, what they say about, oh no, they're using their phones. It was only after, on another occasion, I was on the train, and I started, in the beginning, I'm like calculating. I'm like, all right, I have a soul. We're in this car. There are 8 seats. At least 6 other people in here probably don't have souls. Or they could be parasitic. And I sit next to this young boy, and he's with his book. And there's another lady, and she's on a tablet or a computer, a laptop, whatever. And I'm thinking about something. All of a sudden, he does this reaction and says something related to what I'm thinking about. And I say, oh my goodness. And I say, they don't have any phone in their hand. And I can see her laptop. She's not reading anything off of it. And I said, oh my goodness, they have an ability of telepathy. And that's when I realized that these entities are working in a hive mind. They are working from a hive mind. And I even have noticed that they need to come into contact sometimes with the other NPCs because they push the narrative. They create the narrative and they push it onto the NPCs, and the NPCs run along with it. And this is why they don't want, people who are in very high vibration, because then you're going to start to push the narrative and push this world into the direction of God's kingdom. And they definitely don't want that, because then they can't feed off of that energy. So another thing that started to happen a little bit before I left Barcelona, when I was in the small town, and all these shenanigans were going on with the buses, because remember that town only had one bus, and these buses would go on an hourly schedule. So you had to really wait there and get the bus, and there was no other way to get to where I lived. So towards the last days before I decided, like, I'm not going back to work, I don't know what I'm going to do, before I got the money and I thought about going to France, I started overhearing that they were saying strange things, and they were saying, oh, it's not because of whatever narrative it is. Now it changed. It's because of the phone. So they started fear conditioning me with my phone. I studied early childhood education, and I studied psychology. Basically is that, they do adverse actions to a subject related to an object. If they're using an object that they don't want you to use, every time you use it, strange things will happen, bad things will happen, or loud sounds, or, things like this. So this is why I'm saying. So they started saying things, and they started saying, it's the phone, to the point where there was one occasion when a lot of these NPCs, not all of the people in the train car, obviously, but a little group of the NPCs were standing next to me on the train, and they were just like saying things. Like, it was really it got ramped up towards the end, as I mentioned before, because that was near the time when I again went to go file a report on the neighbor downstairs who pulled my niece's arm. Okay? So anytime there's any kind of proof that you can prove certain things, or things are not adding up, they start ramping up things, So anyways, they started acting like it was the phone. The phone, I don't know. The phone thing, the fear conditioning for the phone, that even made that narrative even made it all the way over here to France. So it changed. And somehow they claimed that the phone, or they would speak so that you would overhear. Like, the phone is related to me being a snitch, and like, I guess snitching on drug dealers or something like that. I don't know how, in particular, the phone, or if it's a magic phone, I don't know. I personally, from things that I've observed, and I know this is like very far-fetched, but I've observed it with my kids as we were here in France. I personally think, I don't know what these NPCs go doing, because, they, like I said, I'm not saying you're not on the dark web being videotape, which is what a lot of targeted individuals say, but it's definitely not a physical dark web. You're on their mental mind hive dark web or something. So I don't really know what shenanigans they do in their little world, because they're basically in a world within a world. So, they you never know what they could have done to my phone or whatever. Maybe they put a frequency on it. And I was on one occasion with my own phone, I felt a frequency like hitting my throat. I was actually dreaming, and I was dreaming, like, for whatever reason, there was like some white dog, and this man was there, and I don't know why in the dream, but I just started speaking in tongues and rebuking it, and I've never spoken in tongues in real life. And as I was speaking in tongues in the dream, it's as if something stopped me in my throat, and I couldn't speak in tongue anymore in the dream. And when I finally, like, pulled out of the dream, it was because my daughter had moved the phone that was right in front of me on the nightstand in front of my face or my throat. And I definitely said, like, what was that? And I asked my daughter, what was that? And she's like, nothing, I just moved the phone. So I don't know what these little NPCs did to the phone, if they can emit frequencies from the phone, whatever. So ever since then, I don't let you shouldn't anyways have the phone around you when you're sleeping, but I definitely make sure, like, I still use it. At this point, I just tell my kids, like, put it down on the floor, don't have it around you, right? But there was one occasion we were actually walking. There were two occasions. So that's why I say I'm not really sure if it's the phone or not. Maybe it's my frequency. Maybe I don't know what it is. But I was walking with the phone, and we were in the supermarket, and as we passed by an older couple, the lady jolted back, and she turned around, and she said, and she looked at me, and she goes, oh, yeah, they're here, like something like that, as if her husband, because her husband told her something, and she had her back turned, and then her head like tilted back, like, and she touched the side of her temple, as if when you get like a shot of frequency. So you never know what these little NPCs did to the phone, if they did something on the phone that makes you a target that only they can hear it, or God knows, because you know that there's some frequency, obviously, that they were doing a lot of frequency testing with animals and all of these kind of things in the past. I don't know, and I don't want to know what goes on in NPC land, but I really don't care. I don't really care. I for all I care, I didn't put the buzzer on my phone, so I need my phone. So they're gonna get their little heads buzzed off. I don't know. Anyways, so I was like, you know, this is like weird. But there was another occasion when I didn't even have the phone on me, and I was walking behind this old man, and he started to like turn around really weird and looking at us. And it wasn't because I guess we were making noise or anything. I think he was just like looking at us, but it was as if he was hearing something, or I can't, for that one, I can't 100% say, but I definitely can say that there have been other occasions where I didn't have the phone on me, and it seemed as if people were instantly like getting impacted or hearing something. You know what I mean? So that's the relationship with the phone thing. And I need my phone because I have to like go out, so I'm not going to be fear conditioned into not using a smartphone, because as well as everyone knows, everybody has to use their phone every day nowadays. It has everything. And I had actually left because the phone I have in France is a different phone than the ones I had in Barcelona. We had left 5 phones, brand new phones, because they had me paranoid, thinking something about the phones. And they kept saying, it's the phone, because these were the kind of, and I talk about this kind of looping thing that they do when they are, getting you hooked into the narrative. They go repeating words, repeating ideas over and over and over again. And especially so that you can hear it. So, at first I didn't know what was going on. So obviously I was like sitting there. I was like, what is with the freaking phone? Like, what is with the phone? What about the phone? Like, how does my phone, or me having a phone, like every other human being in here, mean that I'm a snitch? Like, it wasn't making sense. So anyways, I, began to ignore it. In my memoirs that I did in my book, Chosen by God and Targeted by the Devil, I go into that, and I go into speaking about when I was in France, okay, because like I said, now we're changing a lot of things that are not with the original narrative. I noticed that any time that I would visualize in my mind as I was on the train going home, one, it always seemed as if the NPCs were very quiet, in the sense that like I was given the impression that, for example, telepathically, they could see what I was visualizing, to the extent that on one occasion these 2 popped up. I don't know if they were, obviously it must have been parasitic handlers or something, and I honestly was dude, even minutely, whatever, while I was on the train. They sat in front of me, and they did it when I started to visualize. So they were trying to fear condition me from visualizing. I think it's weird, because I was always under the impression that everyone can, I was always under the impression that everyone visualizes. I don't know if maybe when you're vibrating a little bit higher, if your visualizations interfere with the NPCs or what. I don't know. It's interesting, because I always think about that, because as I had to take that bus to my small town versus when I lived in the center, I obviously was taking an hour trip, and I would usually doze off. And I even would joke with my kids, because everybody else I noticed around me, when they would fall asleep, would lean backwards into the seat on the bus. But I, for some reason, when I was falling asleep, I would always kind of like lean forward. So it always appeared like, I would say I look like those people that like are like meth heads, or like they're like in trance. And I would even call it that. It's as if like you're in a trance. So, I was always like thinking that, I started to think about that. I was like, maybe that's what kind of like in the summer, maybe, every day I was going, and I was doing for an hour, going an hour, coming back, this kind of like, I was visualizing a lot. And even though I was like kind of like in between sleeping, but I wasn't in deep sleep. So I don't know what it is about the visualization, but it bothers the handlers of the NPCs. So but it doesn't seem to bother the actual NPCs, because they actually, I felt on one occasion when I was imagining something, like as if they were indulging in whatever I was visualizing. So obviously that would lead me to think that it's possible that the NPCs, obviously, as they have no consciousness, maybe they're not able to visualize. Remember, we assume, those of us that have souls, that everyone around us also has a soul. And we figure that everybody's doing or visualizing the way we're visualizing. That's what I was under the impression of. I don't know. So I did notice that the NPCs seem to indulge in my visualizations, like as if it's something that they like, but the handlers don't. The parasitic handlers don't. And they've tried to punish me for using it. So that's all I can tell you about things that I've actually observed. And a lot of people will be like, that's out of this world. That is, she's off her rocker. But I could tell you this. If I were in New York, I would not have observed all those things. And that's why I feel like they've always tried to, bring me to New York, to the point where now if anybody tells me, when are you coming back to New York? You don't want to come back to New York? And a lot of people have said that. I'm like, I've been living here for almost 17 to 20 years. I don't even remember now. But I got to Europe and I'm like, why would you still be asking me that? You know what I mean? And that's the Matrix. I feel like that's the Matrix trying to pull me back into that region. Because remember, I spoke a lot about ley lines in my book, Infiltrated Reality. And you do have certain ley lines and energetic portals and areas around the world. So I personally feel an alignment in the Mediterranean. And it just so happens that in France, I definitely feel even more in alignment. So this is why, anytime I hear anybody saying, yeah, you're not going to New York, I hear anybody say this to me, most of the time, they are probably NPCs and trying to lure me back into that region. The same way my daughter's father tried to do that when he took me back. And they were so disappointed when I returned back. They were so disappointed after the 2 years was up that I came back. They were like, oh, and I say, well, I don't know what's going on. God placed me in Barcelona, in Spain, to be close to France and maybe the last days. I don't know what strategies or what's going on or what's to come. But this is where I have to be, because the idea is that, usually people who are very awake, if you notice, they're very spread out. You don't find a lot of us in one area, because it would, disrupt the matrix. So they want to spread out. And I think also in the States, so many things are happening, especially the nutrition is worse. All of those things are meant to block your pineal gland and keep you asleep as much as possible. It's a different culture, a different lifestyle. And, it's for that purpose. And if you look at everything from the purpose of what favors the matrix, you will start to see that a lot of the things around us are really just distractions meant to keep us busy. And I know it's cliche to say that, because it's always been said, what better way to have you distracted than to have you working all day? You know what I mean? Of course. But now, after having this awakening, not only do I say it, but I really, really can see it. Another thing I can tell you about my experience here is that, which is part of gang stalking, which I talk about in my book. A lot of times, the NPCs, when they're looping, repeating a lot of things so that you hear it, so you keep remembering. And I say to myself, I'm like, why do they even need me to hear it? Why you need to ask yourself that question. Why do they need you to see it? They can, if they're threatening to do this and they're threatening to do that, they could just do it. They haven't done it. They could just do it. And I don't know who I am in the spirit realm. I couldn't tell you, but the spectacles have been out of this world. And I haven't heard a lot of, I mean, I've heard other stories of gang stalking, but I haven't heard any quite as um, out there as mine, because the whole thing with the buses and all that, that was really, I don't know, that was kind of mind-boggling. But anyways, so the thing is, I always say, why is it necessary for you to hear it? Why is it necessary for you to see it? Why is it necessary for them to repeat your story and talk about you all the time? You know, so I started thinking to myself, and I said, the only reason why you would keep repeating, oh, and she's doing this because that was what she did, you know, they are trying to make sure that you believe it. They're trying to keep you stuck in the narrative. They're trying to make you see it and hear it so that you believe it, that you're in you know, bombarded with it, and it's part of your being, it's part of your energy and your vibration. So the fact that I was not buying it anymore, that's why they have to keep repeating it. And another thing another person said, which is really funny, and it's true, and I've noticed that too, and I kind of just said that in the, you know, that related to what's going on astrologically, they amp up sometimes with the talking and saying things and trying to do things, right? But even during a regular week, like you'll see, like Monday might start off quiet, Tuesday quiet, Wednesday they turn it up, then it goes quiet on Thursday, and then Friday is full blown. Like, you know, they butter you up. As one person said, they butter you up on Wednesday to attack you on Friday or something like that. And it's really interesting. And I even did a TikTok about it, and I said, I'm gonna just do like a Monday where I do everything completely different than what I normally do to throw them off, because NPCs always follow the same routine, but you can always change. So I just do a lot of different things just so that, like, you know, change the way I walk to the certain place, go this way, or do this one, this something else different, you know. So all of these like little quirky things that you will start to notice. And like I said, the best part of it is trying to expose them. They don't like to be held accountable. They don't like to get caught. And that's the thing, you know. They're trying to make you look crazy, and you're trying to expose them. And the thing is, like I said, when you know what's going on, you could do whatever you want. You could think whatever you want. Don't, you know, because in the beginning I was kind of like, you know, when you weren't completely sure, because now I was thinking it was like, you know, like most gang stalk people do, they say like, no, it's a technology. Even if it is a technology, I mean, no, it's diabolical. Even if it is, when you give it so much thought, like I didn't even give it that much thought in that sense. I just looked at it like the devil, period. When you start overthinking it like that, you're also giving into that energy and going in a different direction. So I was just like, whatever it is, I'm not going to stop thinking what I think. I'm not going to stop feeling like, you know, because you can get into that sensation of thinking like, oh my gosh, they know what I'm thinking. Oh, they can see what I'm seeing. Oh, they can see when I'm looking at myself in the mirror. They can see me naked, or they can see my children naked. Because I really actually did kind of think that in the beginning when I was like, what's going on with this? Like, oh my goodness, this must be some kind of technology. This is like that Neuralink thing, you know. And then I just started saying like, oh, wait, no, it's just a demonic mind hive. That's all. Finish. End of story. No overthinking. They're demonic, period. People who really matter, people with souls, they can't see you. They don't know what you're thinking. So that was my tactic. That's my technique, to just kind of ignoring it. So, you know, it's kind of fun, because then when you know that they're NPC, and especially if you know what they're doing, because like I said, not every NPC is bad. And I really will say this, because another thing that happened when I was in Barcelona, I was leaving the job and I was taking the bus, and that's when they were starting to amp it up towards the end, the last week before I was leaving. And I was on the bus. This guy behind me, actually, I don't know what, he was like pushing into the back of my seat, and he blew on purpose. Like he leaned forward on purpose, and he spoke into my ear. And again, he was from the demographic, you know, so it made it seem as if like I was thinking like, oh my gosh, these people are from that gang, or this gang of people, and they're doing it, you know. But it was like really meant to like unnerve me. And then they made it seem as if like that the phone, whatever, like it had a tracking, I don't know, it, like all these things, right? Because in Barcelona, like I said, had I stayed in Barcelona, I might still have like believed it, or I might not have noticed it. But as I left and it continued, that's what really woke me up. But But yeah, so when I was on the bus one day, and these two Sims, or I call them Sims sometimes, these two NPCs, they were looping and saying things so that I can overhear them. And I wasn't like going to like say anything to them or do anything, but I definitely got up and I walked in front of them just to see like who are they talking to, or I'm sorry, not, like to see who they were. You know what I mean? And there was another lady, and she overheard them, and she stopped me, and it was very clear that she tried to um I wouldn't say like distract, well, kind of, yeah, she tried to distract me from reacting to them, because maybe she thought I was going to do something, but she would only think that if she also was like one of those kind of NPC or handlers or something. But it was as if she didn't. She tried to stop me, and she just said like, "Do you have the time?" And it wasn't done like like she really needed the time. It was done like to break up my concentration and focus on the two girls who were saying this. And then I gave her the time, and then I went back to my seat. So as I said, you never know who all of the entities are that are around us. And they can be angels, there could be many different kind of entities, okay? Um and yeah, and that's the only thing that I can think of like a good number of the experiences that I've had that have really led me to the conclusion of the whole thing about the Matrix and the NPCs being around us. And even in the town where I'm at, a lot of shenanigans started happening. And, what I do is I just play it off, because I say, well, I can say what I want to say. I can think what I want to think. The only way that you would know or care, it's like if I see, and I know why sometimes now, because I'm even beginning to like differentiate between who's the handler, who's the NPC. And, I I'll know why, for example, so and so will send me a message about this, or they'll interrupt me at that right moment, because now that's telling me who they are. They are exposing themselves. But I know that I can think whatever I want. I can say whatever I want, because really, I'm not really doing anything. I barely leave the house. I mean, the only thing that this experience has really done to me is like, you cannot get me to ever go back to eating in a restaurant again. Now that I know, like, I can go to a buffet, maybe if there's like food that, you know, that's not specifically for me, but like, you cannot get me to like ever want to go to a restaurant and have like NPCs cook for me. And I know it's strange because, all this time I've been living in this world, and they've been around us, or they've been around me. And, I might still go get my nails done though, but eating and stuff like that, I don't know. I can't now. I'm like, now I'll be like, I want to eat in my house. But, yeah, the thing is, like, you can now think whatever you want, and you can say whatever you want to yourself and your privacy of your home, because, like, honestly, like, here in France, I know no one. I know no one. So when they try to pull shenanigans, it's really interesting because I don't know anyone. And if they try to come up with something, I could just say, well, how do you know that? Oh, how do you know that? They're exposing that they're NPC. Because in theory, from a completely logical perspective, they shouldn't know certain things about me because I don't know anything about them, unless you're an NPC and then you're all in on it. So you see what I'm saying? So I know it sounds like funny, but these are all like little logical tactics, like what I implemented to beat the system. So I'm just like letting you guys know, especially people who are going through these kind of situations, just things to think about. Just things to think about. And like I said, the utmost important thing that you need to do is be praying, because this is a spiritual war. This is spiritual warfare. Okay? This is happening right now. There's a war going on between good and evil. And whatever these parasitic entities are that are just roaming around in this realm, inside of these vessels, they're in teenagers, they're in old people, they're in everything. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But please, turn to Jesus. Know that Yeshua, Jesus Christ, is our Savior in that sense. And that's what he was trying to teach us, how to transcend this. You need to be in a higher vibration than them, because otherwise they cannot survive. You will starve them. They live and feed off of negative energy. They live off of it. It's their lush. Okay? So you need to be vibrating higher. Starve them out. Starve them out. That's the only thing I can suggest. And try to promote building community with other souled individuals. Because, like I said, they have us spread out far apart from each other to maintain the matrix and not destabilize it. But a lot of people are waking up. The thing is, a lot of people are very fearful of speaking up. They won't talk about this because they don't want to seem crazy. They won't talk about any paranormal or supernatural experiences because they care too much about what people think. They're still in their ego. I don't know. I've passed that point at this point. So, but I think it's really important that people who've had these experiences come out and speak about it. And it's hard because you know that you're going to always have the parasitic NPCs and, these agents that try to make targeted individuals look bad. And like if you try to go on a website that's for targeted individuals, there are always going to be people who are in there who aren't targeted individuals and just want to make us look crazy. You know what I mean? Just think back when the soldiers were coming back from wars and they were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and all these things, and they were claiming that the government was like doing these kind of experiments with them and all of these kind of things, and it was making them go on a rampage, and everybody's like, no, they're crazy. Oh no, but now we know it's MK Ultra. You know what I mean? So you can't dismiss it, but trust me, I would never lie and put and you know what I mean? Like, I would never, if I had to risk my reputation for something, it'd be something that I really believed in. So I know how people are going to think, I know what they're going to say, and I will still stand in my truth to this day and tell you to your face and publicly everywhere for you to know. We are in a spiritual war, we are in a matrix, and there are a bunch of people running around here that do not have souls around us. That's all I'm going to tell you. And the ones that don't have souls are prey to whatever kind of demonic agents that are running around trying to fight against God's people. Fortunately, the matrix isn't matrixing anymore. If you really think about it, up until now that we're in the 5D, the devil, what he's been really doing is just repeating the same tactics over and over. And then when humanity was getting too smart, creating complete resets so that we would forget everything. But now people are still remembering, and it's not as easy to just reset. So you're starting to notice, if you're awake, the same tactics are being implemented. And it's not really necessarily that the devil's that smart per se. He's wise in knowing human nature. He knows the things that people, especially who are functioning out of their base energy points, what they desire and how they might react. But if the consciousness is lifting and everyone is rising, then if you think about it, that's probably something that's out of his league. And just remember, when you're being attacked and you're being targeted, what that really means is that the devil believes more in you than sometimes you believe in yourself, because you still have your doubts, you still are questioning, but he knows what you're capable of, and that's why he's trying to stop you. Anyways, I hope that this was beneficial to someone. It was much longer than my average podcast. Remember to subscribe to the website to stay updated on future podcasts and blogs. And until next time, see you soon, and God bless.